Hi, everyone. This is Vipin, and I'm here with my colleague, Michael. Hi, Michael.
Hey, Vipin, and hi, everyone.
How are you?
I am really excited for this conversation. It's been a long time coming, and to be here with you and to be having it is very exciting.
Okay, well, no one knows yet what is the conversation we're about to have. So let me introduce it. So, Michael, you and I have had the privilege of taking a year-long course on parts work, which is based on internal family systems. And we've done that course with Guthrie Sayen, who is one of the most exceptional instructors that I have ever learned from. And the course just wrapped up 2 weeks ago. And you suggested that we record an Upbuilding the Self episode on our takeaways from the course and how parts work has affected us. And I thought it was a great idea. So here we are. And I get the opportunity to interview you today and hear about your insights, which I am really excited about. So thank you for suggesting this and for being such a willing participant as well.
Thank you. And as I shared with you before we were recording, you are as much an expert in parts work as I am. And so hopefully we can both share our experiences as we have the conversation today.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't call myself an expert at all, but I would call myself a learner here, and we're here sharing our learnings. So
that sounds great.
So maybe we could start with the question, what is parts work to begin with? And I mentioned also internal family systems. So maybe you could just describe what is parts work and how does it relate to internal family systems, or IFS as it's often referred to.
Yeah, I almost think of them interchangeably. And so parts work is really a framework or a system for understanding our inner world. And it's been used in various therapy settings, and that's really where it originated in the therapy room. We use it in coaching. It's used in schools and businesses, so it's really taken on an incredible life and energy of its own as more people have found out about it over the last few years and few decades. And our teacher, Guthrie, he likes to call it a way of life. So you don't even need one of these formal coaching or therapy relationships to use it, because it's just a way of thinking about what's going on inside of us. And the idea is that each of us as human beings are made up of a series of parts or little sub-personalities. And these parts, you can basically think of them as human beings. They have their own fears, desires, needs, strategies, and they want stuff for us. These are the parts of us that are running our lives. They're the ones pulling the strings. And the whole idea is that if we're able to bring a voice to these parts, to really understand them, to get to know them on a much deeper level, then we can more healthily integrate them into our lives. So they're pulling the strings without us, without our awareness. And so by bringing awareness to them, we can see how we can more healthily incorporate them into our lives and ultimately get them not to be the driving force for our actions, but instead come from a different place, which is much more of a self-leadership place where our self is running the show rather than these parts. And we can talk about what that means as we go throughout today.
Okay, good. So it sounds quite complex, actually.
Yeah, and it also can sound a little woo-woo, a little new agey. I certainly came when I first heard about it, I was like, sub-personalities. I have little beings inside of me that are running the show. And so I think that's a natural reaction. But for anyone who has ever said, there's a part of me that feels this way. And then there's another part of me that feels that way. Or there's a part of me that wants to do X, but another part of me that wants to do Y. There's a part of me that wants to, work really hard and can't stop working. And then there's another part of me that wants to watch YouTube all night. You're doing parts work. That is really the first step in parts work.
Yeah, this multitude of personalities that exist within us that have different desires and needs, and understanding those parts a little bit better, bringing them to the surface rather than having them be sort of running the show without our awareness.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what converted you? You just mentioned that you first thought of it as a little bit woo, and now you don't feel that way at all. You're really excited to record a podcast about it. What converted you?
So the guy who started parts work was a guy named Dick Schwartz, who was a therapist. And in the 80s, he was talking to his clients and just getting a lot of information from his clients and seeing how this all worked. And he basically said he stumbled upon it. And he also calls himself a ardent empiricist, I think is the term that he used. He saw what works. And I like to think of myself, I have a part of me that also likes to think of myself as an ardent empiricist. Whatever works, that's what I want to use. And so I saw that this system really works. And there were two incredible insights from the system that led me to this conclusion. The first is that we have parts, but we are not our parts. And that was mind-blowing to me, because I've always thought of myself as I am angry, or I am a overachiever, or I am lazy. And that felt very final. It was like, that's who I am at my core. But when I started to do parts work, I could see that I had different parts of myself that carried anger, that carried laziness, that carried this impulse to be an overachiever. But that's not who I am. Instead, I am the self. And again, we can talk more about what that means.
Yeah. Well, tell me, this is great. So what was the impact of that? What is the difference between the statement, I am angry, and I have a part that's carrying anger? The anger doesn't have such a strong hold on our life. It's not your identity. It's not exactly. It's not your identity. It's also, it's not the end of the story. Whereas if I am angry and that's who I really think of myself as, that, then it's the end of the story. It's like I have no choice. Mm-hmm. I have no freedom to not be that way if I really see myself as that way. Well, what if I am angry right now and I am not angry in 10 minutes from now? So there's also movement with those identities, no?
Yeah, that's true. And so I think that's why the second insight is so important.
Okay.
Which is that, and I think this was even more mind-blowing than the first insight, is that all parts are good. Just like all people are good, but good people do bad things, all parts are inherently good. So even something like anger or rage, which I definitely carry within myself, that impulse, that part has a positive intent for me.
Yeah, the part of you that is angry, or even carries the part of you that carries anger or rage, has a purpose. It's trying to serve you in a certain way.
Exactly.
And that's its positive intent.
Exactly. It feels like it needs to use the strategy of rage or anger in order to serve me in a certain way, based on my internal wiring, based on my conditioning, based on things that happened to me throughout my childhood and even into my adulthood, this part of me has taken on the belief that it needs to be angry in order to protect me in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And that was hard to take at first. But once I started having some of these dialogues with the part itself, I could actually hear what that positive intent was.
And what was the impact of that?
The impact of that was that I could start to, first of all, get where it was coming from, have compassion for it. And again, that's
meaning
for it, the part. Yeah. And again, this sounds a little, this part of parts work sounds a little woo woo, but, if I were to think about it, like this part of me works really hard. This part of me works really hard. It's on constant alert. It's exploding at various times. And it's also a part of me that I have judged for a long time. It's a part of me that I dislike quite a bit because I've seen it wreak havoc in my life. Mm-hmm. And by understanding where it's coming from, what it wants for me, then it doesn't have to, first of all, I can have compassion for it and feel with it, and then start to have dialogue so it doesn't have to have such a strong hold on me.
Yeah. And well, what is the result of the compassion that you feel for that part?
If you think about you're a parent and a kid is acting out.
Yeah.
Even if the kid is 100% wrong, if you're just scolding the kid and letting them know how wrong they are and judging the kid, things are never going to change. In fact, it will likely get worse because the reason why they're acting out is to get your attention or because something else is going wrong. And so that extra judgment, sort of the piling on of dissatisfaction with the actions of that part or that human being is not going to serve anyone.
Yeah.
In fact, it'll only make things worse. And so by having compassion for it, it helps it to relax. It helps it to see that actually I have similar objectives, similar goals as it might have for me. And maybe there are other more productive strategies that I could employ that would also help it meet its goals.
Yeah. That's a really helpful analogy to the parent-child relationship. And you sort of have all these parts that have needs, and how do we treat those needs with compassion?
Yeah. And I've even named my parts. That was something that was suggested to us.
Yeah.
My anger part is called Johnny Anger. It's
Johnny
like a very,
Anger.
he's a very, it's a playful name so that I don't take it so seriously.
Yeah.
It's like a little being that sits on my shoulder, and I can be in dialogue with him. And he's a little kid. He's not a mature adult. He's a little kid who doesn't have so much self-control and really thinks that he needs to employ these strategies. And it affects my life in big ways. But he is just a little kid. And if I treat him like that with respect, appreciation, I hear from him, then he doesn't act out as much.
Yeah. Wow. So what is Johnny Anger like now after doing all of this work? And what in your relationship with that part, how has it shifted?
Well, I wish I could say that I never have fits of anger or rage anymore, but that is not the case.
Then I would think that you have found a miracle to lots of our own needs for what we need to transform about ourselves, or what we desire to.
Yeah. it's a much more open relationship, and there's much more understanding in my relationship with him than when I first started. Mm-hmm. And so when these things do happen, when there's an incident or I lose my temper, hopefully in the moment I can actually like call a metaphorical timeout and have a little bit of dialogue with him. And that will happen at times. Sometimes I don't catch myself in the moment and the anger and rage is too much, and I'm able to process it a little bit more later on. But I have a language, I have a framework, a system, a tool to actually think about all of this. And so when the anger does happen, I also don't go as much into spirals of shame and feeling bad about the anger, which is also not helpful. It's not that I'm condoning the losing the temper. That's not what this is about. But if I go into shame about having a temper,
that sounds like another part. That sounds like another part that shows up.
Exactly. And that's the cool thing about parts work is like, there's just always stuff to discover. And we have to deal, in order for me to truly deal with the anger part, I also needed to deal, and this was separate, to deal with the part that feels very judgmental of my angry part, because that part had a very positive intent as well. Even though he's incredibly judgmental, he causes me a lot of shame. He didn't want me to have to experience the negative effects, and for the people in my life to experience the negative effects of the anger.
Yeah, everyone seems to be working for the right purpose, the right intent. But as you talk about this part that carries anger and how it has positive intent, and this other part that carries shame, that's also there to serve you, and this third part that is a very judgmental part, but you also see its positive intent, I'm left wondering how we have this multitude of parts, all of which they all have positive intent, and they all seem to be, or you would hope that they're somewhat under our control, but maybe that's that's the pivotal misunderstanding. But with all these parts with positive intent, still we can act and behave in ways that are not aligned with who we want to be. But then immediately what I thought of is, well, even if you extend that, you said all parts are good, just like all human beings. The understanding is similar, that all human beings are good. And if that's true, we still have a lot of conflict. We have war. We have a lot of challenges and difficulties. And so that's the same thing that's happening inside of ourselves when we are acting or behaving in ways that are not how we would like to be or not aligned with our values, even if all the parts have positive intent. I'm curious, what would you say about that?
Yeah, well, I think this is why Dick Schwartz named the system internal family systems, because just like a family, which can often be dysfunctional, there's a lot of different parts to the family. And even if everyone has a good intent, people have their own way of seeing things and their own ways of relating to each other and different fears and desires. And also, one of the key insights from parts work is that parts take on burdens. They take on these strategies which come from fears. And those are the things that actually do wreak havoc in our lives. So even if they have a positive intent to have us be in the example of Johnny Anger, he doesn't want me to get taken advantage of.
Yeah.
He wants me to reach my maximum potential. He wants me to have relationships that I can trust. And so when he sees something that violates that, he goes into action.
Yeah.
Because he's taken on the belief that he needs to go into action. And so just because somebody or some part has a positive intent does not at all ensure that things will go well.
Yeah. And does he now, with the dialogue that you've been having, it sounded like you're saying he doesn't necessarily feel as quick to go into action. Sometimes yes, but sometimes there's a little bit more space where you can sort of talk him off the ledge, so to speak.
That's right. Yeah. You've recorded a episode and wrote a reflection on creating space between stimulus and response. And this is that. And it's also a clear call to action about what to do with that space between stimulus and response. Yeah. In the space, I can have a dialogue with my parts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's like there's a yellow light. There's just the red light. You notice a part getting activated, a yellow light, which is let me process actually what's happening and have that dialogue. And then the green light that allows you to proceed in a way that feels in alignment with your values. Yeah. Okay. So you've mentioned these two insights. I have parts, but I am not those parts. And then that all parts are good. And it's interesting when you were saying I have parts, or I have a part, but I am not that part. It reminded me also of, we talk a lot about the ego at Upbuild, and that I have an ego. I am not my ego. And that's separate. It also reminds me of, I think we recorded a podcast. I wasn't part of this, but around this phrase, there I go again, mm-hmm. which to me is similar to thinking about my part getting activated. And often when I say there I go again, which is a phrase that we use a lot to see ourselves as distinct from our egos, and seeing our ego patterns emerge, that's very similar to what you're talking about here, where I might see a part get activated and say, there goes Johnny Anger. Let me go and have a conversation with him and just see if I can create some more calmness or clarity to help move forward.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I didn't have a language to share this before you just said that. But I think that's why parts work has spoken to me as strongly as it has, because it feels so aligned with our other work around understanding the ego and seeing that our egos are parts of us and they have strong holds on us, but they are not us at the end of the day. And being able to be super clear about that distinction gives us so much power and gives us so much choice in life.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of alignment with our work, in my notes for this course back in last September, the first sentence that I wrote down in my notes was that this course is this, and these are Guthrie's own words, but I wrote his words. This course is essentially about accessing self, and that the parts work way of doing that is to ask the parts to step back so that the self can emerge. And I think, we at Upbuild talk about various ways to access the self. And a lot of that is working on our ego, because that's getting in the way of our true self, the sort of spiritual core of who we are, our essence. And another way is by cultivating that spiritual core. And parts work to me it relates to working on our ego, but it's been such a beautiful year-long study in how do I let these parts that are forward and active ease a little bit, step back, and allow my truest self to step forward and emerge.
Yeah, beautiful. And now that we're talking about the self,
let's talk about it.
It's that can also feel like a pretty out there concept of like parts, self, I am the self. So what does that actually mean? Yes. And another one of the greatest insights, I feel like I'm going to keep saying this throughout our conversation, is the 8 C's of the self. And I had to write this down because I knew I would forget all of them. But the 8 C's are compassion, creativity.
Wait, before you mention those, what are the 8 C's? What are 8 C's? Can you share?
Yeah. So the 8 C's are characteristics, feelings, qualities that give us a clue that we are operating from the self. So when we are operating from any of these 8 C's, we know that they're self-present.
Yeah. That the self is characterized by these 8 words that all begin with the letter C.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, lay it down for us.
So the 8 C's are compassion, creativity, curiosity, confidence, courage, calmness, connectedness, and clarity. And I was shocked that all of these could actually begin with the same letter.
I thought you were going to say something else. I didn't know what you were going to say you were shocked about, but I thought you were going to say you were shocked that I have all of these traits within me.
Yeah, we'll get to that. But my first thought when I heard this was, how is this? This feels too cute. This feels like too much of a, trying to jam something into jam a round peg into a square hole. But the more I sat with it, and also the more I used it in both my own self-work and in client relationships as a coach myself, it just brought so much clarity to what the self is, and how do I know if I'm being myself, or how do I know if I'm being my parts? All I need to do is to check in. And we've all had the experience of feeling compassionate. We know what it feels like to really be in a space of curiosity. We know what it feels like to feel calm. And on the opposite side, when we're feeling agitated, it means we're not operating from enough self. So the opposite, the antonyms to all of these words also help give me the clue that I'm operating from parts rather than from self.
Yeah.
And this was a big insight.
Yeah. Well, so as you were talking about that, I was thinking, well, what about a curious part of me? How, there's a part of me that is really curious in a conversation. What's the difference between that being a part versus being part of myself?
Yeah, well, one of the other things that Guthrie has offered to us is that the self has no agenda, and it doesn't have tight timelines. So if my curiosity is if I'm using it to get something from somebody else, and I need it in a certain way, and it's coming from a place of wanting to just like get gossip, and that's not real curiosity. But what curiosity from the self looks like is where I have no agenda. I have no need to accomplish anything on a tight timeline, but I am just genuinely curious about what's going on. And there's spaciousness in that curiosity.
Amazing. So these 8 C's also help you identify when you have more of yourself present versus yourself is sort of lost among the sea of all the parts.
Yeah. And the reason why that is important is twofold. First of all, this is what we're shooting for. This is our North Star. We want to be more and more and more coming from a place of self. And second of all, we can only do the work of hearing from our parts and having conversations with them when there is some self present.
Yeah. One of the other things that Guthrie shared that I thought was also very poignant and insightful was that he said the overarching goal of this entire program is to help each of us access and coach from what he would say a critical mass of self, so that we can help others access and live from a critical mass of self. He would talk about only needing a modicum of self is enough to actually heal a lot of parts that are carrying burdens.
Yeah. And I think it's been our experience that when we have that modicum of self, it naturally builds.
Yeah. I think so. The experience is, if one person in a conversation can be more in their true nature, then that automatically helps the other person step into their true nature. It's kind of like when we do a lot of work with the Enneagram and our ego masks. We talk about what happens when, in a conversation, one person is able to remove their mask a little bit and just be more authentic, more vulnerable, be who they are. That automatically creates a container where somebody else is able to feel secure to do something similar. And it's so freeing to be able to remove those masks that if you're bringing part of your true nature into the conversation, more and more of your true nature, it allows the other person also to step in. And that's really powerful.
Yeah.
The other thing related to this is, I think Guthrie has talked about the way that we heal suffering of our parts. Our parts, there are many parts that are carrying various that are suffering, and the way that we heal that is by bringing more and more of our self, which is carrying these 8 C's, to almost the self has like a light, like the sun, and it has all of these qualities. And when we bring more of ourself out to our parts and to the world, there's healing that is happening in that process.
Yeah. Beautiful. So he talks about how the internal, like if we can heal our internal system, that's also how we heal the external systems in the world.
Yeah. Which very much relates to what we talk about at Upbuild all the time, which is, if we can work on our own self, our internal self, then, that's, in order to be our best selves out in the world, we have to work on our inner world. And a lot of that, working on our ego and our spiritual self is then what we are able to offer to the world and to all of our relationships.
Yeah. So it's a very practical system. No, it's a very practical system, because when we do inner work and get inner results, we also get outer results.
So it's efficient.
It's efficient. The other thing I wanted to share is something that you shared with me very early on. And I don't remember where you got this from, about like what coaching is all about. Mm. And you shared that really at the end of the day, most people are looking for self-acceptance from coaching relationships, and really in every aspect of life. They're often out there doing, certainly my own experience of myself, out there doing things so that I can prove myself to myself and therefore be able to accept myself. So if we think of self-acceptance as one of the main goals of coaching and of life, this system is really helpful in doing that. because we stop rejecting these parts of ourselves and instead can integrate them into our life and our beings, and also see how we're different than the parts themselves and see how we are actually self rather than the parts. And all of a sudden, I stopped rejecting myself so much. And there's a more morsels of acceptance that start to happen, and those result in bigger morsels. And it's a beautiful system that can aid in that process.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. And in that process, parts that are carrying burdens, maybe for years and years and years, can become unburdened and liberated, free to be I guess, what does it look like when they're free? I was going to say without an agenda, but that would be only self, I guess, right?
Yeah, well, I think what Guthrie has shared with us is that when parts realize they don't need to do their strategies and that they're not their burdens and they can release those burdens, they get to do whatever it is that they're naturally good at. So for example, Johnny Anger, he's a forceful dude in this world. He's got a lot of energy, and the way he's currently or in the past has been employing that energy is losing the temper and yelling and getting upset with people. But one of the things I asked him was, hey, if like you knew that I was going to be completely taken care of and that I would be successful and that nobody would take advantage of me and that I was totally safe, what would you prefer to do? And he told me that he would prefer to be by my side, giving me that life force energy to go out and achieve things. So he would be by my side, like helping me to work really hard and to find areas of the world that I thought I could improve and be that energy behind those initiatives.
Yeah. The two questions that come up for me as you're saying this, one is, how can you convince him? You said, if you knew that I would be successful and that I would be X and I would be Y, but those are hypothetical statements. So if I'm Johnny Anger, I'm thinking, well, yeah, but like I can't be sure of that. So I have to keep playing my role.
Yeah. And he does. But I got information about what he would prefer to do, right, and to do what he's currently doing, which was really helpful to hear. And also, as we talked about earlier, hopefully by really hearing from him and also being in dialogue about how I also want the same things, which he might not have been totally aware of, it does help him to soften back a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. The other question I was thinking is, if you've never experienced internal family systems or parts where, and it can sound a little schizophrenic, like you're having these conversations with yourself and you're referring to this part as a person, as he, and how he's going to show up in your life. And so what would you say? How could someone who has no experience of this get a little bit of a taste for what you're describing that might help them understand and also sort of potentially, take that steps further? Where do you start?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's, I think to get like the most basic taste is just to think of an area of your life where, or to hear yourself saying, there's a part of me that does X or feels X. And then to think one layer deeper, what might be the reason why this part feels this way or wants to do this? And only think of it in a positive intent kind of way. What is the positive intent? What protection or what goal does this part have for me? And I think that's probably the most basic foray into this in a, in an individual type of way. Now, I think what's much more helpful is to be able to find someone who has either been trained in this, or at least is informed enough about IFS, maybe has had some practice themselves as a client, if you're not finding a coach or a therapist, to help guide you in some of these discussions. There are also a lot of books. Dick Schwartz has written a bunch of books, so there's a lot of resources out there as well. And just to name, Dick Schwartz's most recent book is No Bad Parts, which I love that name, obviously, given what I've shared about that powerful insight. And that's a really good place to start.
Yeah. I'd love to ask you also, so you've shared a lot about your experience, how this work has affected you personally, in terms of kind of receiving parts work coaching or thinking about your own parts. What has been your experience of using parts work as a coach with the people that you get to work with?
It takes courage for me to offer this possibility of doing this kind of work with my clients, because a lot of my clients are very practical. They want results. They're hard driving. They don't want to hear any of this new agey stuff. And what I found is that when there's enough trust in the relationship and I can put aside some of my parts and come from that place of courage and offer this out to clients, it's one of the best ways to do really deep work very quickly. So I have a handful, not a majority, but a handful of clients who I do IFS work very consistently with. And those sessions are almost always deep and powerful because they come in feeling some of the polarities or feeling some of the negative effects of their parts. And through this like pretty clear and systematic way of looking at these parts, and there are very specific questions that I, as the practitioner or another practitioner, would ask to help deepen the understanding of the parts, to hear the positive intention, to help them release these burdens, and then to understand what they would prefer to do if they weren't taking on those roles. And it's been amazing. So I can't say that I have the courage to do it with everyone. Some people won't relate to it or would have too many parts, too many defense mechanisms against doing that. But I always hold it in my mind that maybe there'll come a day in each of my relationships where I can bring parts work into the practice.
Yeah, I have been, I would say, just amazed at how, both in seeing the week-to-week demonstrations in the course where Guthrie is coaching someone in class about a topic that they want coaching on using parts work, and the profound transformative impact that it has on those individuals. And then, and similar to you in my own coaching, sometimes it seems like you have some magic that you have access to that is really allowing people to see things that they weren't seeing before. And it reminds me a little bit of how sometimes, again, with our work with the Enneagram, which is a personality typology that we use at Upbuild, that gives us sometimes a blueprint on what might be happening inside in someone's inner world. People feel like I often feel like that also is like, has a feeling of magic where people get insights that they're like, how do you know so much about what's happening inside? And I feel similarly about parts work, that it feels like you have some magic that you have access to.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I'm thinking back on one of my relationships where we don't have the relationship of doing parts work, but this person has talked to me a lot about his inner critic and how intense the inner critic can be on him. And one of the things that I asked him was what does your inner critic want for you? What is the positive intent of the inner critic? And so it wasn't like a full parts work demonstration or a full parts work coaching, but it was just one question that I got very clearly from my parts work training. And for him, it was mind blowing that he could see that actually his inner critic wanted all these good things for him. And it just helped to relax how unhappy he was with his inner critic, which of course has had the effect of making the inner critic not so loud.
Yeah. Wonderful example. So what is next for you on this journey of parts work, both as a sort of recipient of parts work and as a coach?
Yeah. Well, as a recipient, my overachieving part has taken a Google spreadsheet and started to map out all of my parts. So I think I've identified 35 parts so far. And just getting a sense of like what are my family members of my internal family system, and seeing what do they want for me, what are the negative effects of these parts, what is the positive intent, all of that stuff. So I want to continue to map that out, and I am continuing to work with my partner from the parts work course far beyond the ending of that course. So we will be coaching each other on a weekly basis in using the parts work framework. And so I hope to deepen my understanding of the different parts that I've been able to map out. And then in my own coaching practice, I want to get more courage to offer this to other people. So if any of my clients are listening to this, please ask about parts work. It is, I feel so passionate about it, and want to be able to do that deep work with people who want to do the deep work for themselves.
That's amazing. Thank you for putting that out into the world. Thank you for all the work that you're doing on yourself. When I've heard people talk about, I love the spreadsheet that you shared or that you just mentioned. And I've heard people talk about being able to kind of call all of their parts to the dinner table, and each one has a seat, and you're able to actually have dialogue with everyone there. And I was just thinking, you'll need a pretty big dinner table, a pretty large one for your 35 parts that you've identified. If I could have a 36th chair there, I would love to be just enjoy the dinner party. Well, it sounds like it would be very, very entertaining and stimulating.
Well, I would be humiliated, I think, to have you there. But I do think of it as my internal board of directors in some way. And if I were having an external board of directors, Vipin, you would definitely have a seat at that table.
Thank you. Thank you for this conversation. Thank you for whetting our appetites around parts work. And the biggest thank you for putting that in request out there and intention, not only for you, but I think for everybody who we work with, to ask about parts work and to explore it, because there's so much there's so much wisdom in that for ourselves to understand ourselves better. We'd love to bring that to everybody.
Amazing. And thank you for being a partner in the course and for asking all of these really good questions to help bring all of this out, and for doing the parts work yourself, because I know it's having a big impact on you, and as a result, an impact on our organization and your clients in the world. Thank you, Vipin.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much for this.
And thank you, everyone, for listening.